Beneath glittering waves, beauty turns to panic in an instant. Cages twist, boats shatter, and the sea itself becomes the hunter. From South Africa's storm-tossed coasts to Alaska's icy bays, each account reveals the ocean's raw dominance and sudden fury. In this video, we'll uncover 6 chilling encounters where humans faced nature's most unforgiving predators. On November 10, 2025, the waters off Gansbaai, South Africa, transformed from a marine biologist's dream into an unimaginable nightmare. This coastal town, perched along the Western Cape, had long earned its reputation as the great white shark capital of the world. The surrounding ocean, where the frigid Atlantic collided with warmer Indian Ocean currents, created perfect hunting grounds for apex predators. Seal Island lay just offshore, a buffet table for sharks that patrolled the depths with calculated precision. For decades, cage diving operations had thrived here, offering tourists and researchers alike the chance to observe these magnificent creatures from behind protective steel bars. The industry had an almost spotless safety record, built on years of careful protocol and respect for the ocean's most efficient killers. Sophie van der Merwe, a 29-year-old marine biologist from Cape Town, had studied great whites for 6 years. Her research focused on feeding patterns and seasonal migration routes along South Africa's coast. She had descended into shark cages 47 times without incident, always maintaining professional distance and scientific objectivity. On that November morning, she arrived at the harbor with her partner, Dylan Kotze, a structural engineer who had helped design reinforced diving equipment for deep-sea expeditions. Sophie was several months pregnant, though only close friends and family knew. Dylan had initially expressed concern about the dive, but Sophie reassured him that they would observe together from the safety of the cage while collecting behavioral data. The tour operator, a weathered veteran of Gansbaai's diving scene, had checked and double-checked every weld, every bolt, every connection point on the cages that morning. The boat motored out just after dawn, cutting through moderate swells toward the diving zone. Crew members prepared the chum buckets, mixing fish oil and ground bait that would drift through the water column and attract sharks from miles away. Within 40 minutes, the first dorsal fin sliced through the surface, then another. Great whites began circling the boat, their torpedo-shaped bodies gliding with unsettling grace. Sophie suited up, pulling on her wetsuit and checking her oxygen regulator while Dylan did the same. They would share the same cage, suspended just below the waterline, where visibility remained decent despite the churning bait slick. The descent went smoothly. Sophie and Dylan's cage rattled slightly as it settled into position, seawater rushing through the bars and surrounding them in cold, murky green. They positioned themselves on opposite sides of the cage, Dylan's masked face turned toward Sophie with a thumbs-up gesture. The first shark approached slowly, a 14-footer that investigated the cage with lazy curiosity before veering away. Sophie recorded mental notes about its scarred snout and the way it angled its body to peer through the bars with one dark, unblinking eye. Above, crew members continued chumming, tossing handfuls of bait that sent oil slick spreading across the surface. Then the massive one arrived. Witnesses on the boat would later describe it as the largest great white they had ever encountered, easily exceeding 20 feet in length. Its girth suggested a female, possibly pregnant herself, with a head like a boulder and jaws that could engulf a seal whole. The shark did not approach cautiously. It came fast, drawn by the thrashing bait and the metallic vibrations of the cage rattling in the current. What happened next unfolded in seconds but stretched into an eternity for those watching from above. The shark struck their cage head-on with incredible force. The impact sent shockwaves through the steel frame, bending corner bars and warping the protective grid. Sophie and Dylan's bodies slammed against the far side of the cage as it tilted violently in the water. The shark, now in a feeding frenzy triggered by the chaos, did not retreat. Instead, it bit down on the cage itself, its serrated teeth scraping against metal with a sound that carried through the water like grinding gears. One bar snapped, then another. The shark's jaws pushed through the widening gap, and Sophie and Dylan found themselves pinned against the cage wall with nowhere to go. The cage swung wildly in the turbulence, tilting at a severe angle. Both occupants could see the massive predator forcing its way through the damaged structure, but remained trapped in their submerged prison. Crew members above scrambled into action, some working the winch system to raise the cage while others grabbed poles and hooks to drive the shark away. But great whites, once committed to an attack, rarely retreat easily. The predator's tail thrashed, its entire body convulsing as it tried to force more of itself through the damaged cage. Sophie and Dylan suffered catastrophic injuries as the shark's weight crushed them against the steel. By the time crew members managed to partially lift the cage and drive the shark back with concentrated strikes, it was far too late. The cage surfaced moments later. Crew members stared in horror at the mangled structure and its occupants. Emergency protocols were activated, with the boat racing back toward shore while crew members attempted first aid. Both Sophie and Dylan were beyond saving. One crew member sat beside their bodies, hands shaking uncontrollably. The shark had disappeared into the depths, leaving only blood-stained water and bent metal as evidence of its assault. Authorities arrived within the hour. Marine biologists and shark experts descended on Gansbai, analyzing every aspect of the incident. Their conclusions centered on multiple contributing factors: aggressive chumming that had overstimulated the sharks, an unusually large and possibly territorial female, and catastrophic structural failure when the cage took an impact beyond its design specifications. Dylan Coetzee and Sophie van der Merwe, along with her unborn child, were declared dead at the scene. The incident sent shockwaves through South Africa's diving community. Cage diving operations were temporarily shut down, while new safety protocols were developed. The event served as a brutal reminder that even the most carefully controlled encounters with apex predators carried inherent, sometimes fatal risks. The ocean, indifferent and ancient, had simply done what it always did: followed the instincts of hunger and territory that had kept great whites alive for millions of years. The Queensland coast of Australia had always been a paradise for adventure seekers, particularly during the sweltering summer months when warm waters and clear skies created perfect conditions for water sports. The stretch of coastline near the township of Airlie Beach, positioned along the Whitsunday region, attracted thousands of tourists annually. Beneath the turquoise surface, however, lurked one of the ocean's most unpredictable predators. Bull sharks frequented these shallow coastal waters year-round, drawn by river estuaries that emptied into the sea, and the abundance of fish that congregated near the reef systems. Unlike their more cautious great white cousins, bull sharks possessed an aggressive temperament and a willingness to investigate anything unusual in their territory. On February 14, 2025, 3 friends from Brisbane decided to celebrate Valentine's Day with an adventure rather than the traditional dinner date. Liam Breswick, a 26-year-old physiotherapist, had organized the parasailing excursion for himself and his 2 closest friends, Zoe Talridge and Harper Quinlan. The trio had met during university and maintained their friendship through regular outdoor adventures. Zoe worked as a veterinary nurse while Harper taught primary school. None of them had ever parasailed before, but the promise of soaring above crystal-clear waters while tethered to a speedboat seemed like the perfect way to create lasting memories. They arrived at the marina just after noon, when the sun hung high and the ocean stretched out like hammered glass. The parasailing operator, a tanned man in his 50s who had run tours for 15 years, briefed them on safety procedures. He explained how the harnesses worked, how they would ascend gradually as the boat picked up speed, and how communication would happen through hand signals since wind noise made shouting useless. The 3 friends suited up in life jackets and climbing harnesses, joking nervously about who would scream loudest once they were airborne. The boat motored out beyond the swimming zones, past the marked buoys that separated casual swimmers from deeper water. Below the surface, schools of baitfish had congregated in massive numbers, their silvery bodies flashing in the sunlight as they fed on plankton. This concentration of prey had not gone unnoticed. Several bull sharks, including a particularly large 10-foot female, had moved into the area that morning. Bull sharks possessed a unique ability among their species to tolerate both saltwater and freshwater, allowing them to hunt in river mouths and shallow coastal zones where other sharks rarely ventured. Their stocky build and powerful jaws made them formidable predators, and their tendency toward territorial aggression had earned them a reputation as one of the most dangerous shark species to humans. Liam went up first, his parasail inflating with a sharp crack as the boat accelerated. He rose smoothly into the air, his legs dangling perhaps 15 meters above the water. Zoe and Harper followed moments later, their tandem harness lifting them in a gentle arc. The sensation was extraordinary. From their elevated position, they could see straight down through the clear water to the sandy bottom, and the dark patches of reef. Schools of fish moved in coordinated waves below them, and for several minutes, the experience felt magical. Then the bull shark made its move. The large female had been tracking the boat's shadow, and the unusual vibrations created by the parasail lines cutting through the air and occasionally skimming the water's surface. Bull sharks relied heavily on electroreception and lateral line sensors to detect prey, and the combination of splashing, shadow movement, and the trailing ropes created a sensory profile that triggered investigative behavior. The shark surged upward from the depths, its broad snout breaking the surface as it lunged at the trailing line connected to Liam's harness. The impact was violent and immediate. The shark's jaws clamped onto the rope approximately 2 meters below Liam's feet, its serrated teeth sawing through the braided nylon with terrifying efficiency. Liam felt the sudden jerk as his harness went slack on one side, causing him to swing wildly in the air. He could see the shark thrashing below, its muscular body twisting as it tried to tear away whatever had entered its mouth. Zoe and Harper, parasailing nearby, watched in horror as the predator circled back for another pass. The boat crew reacted with practiced urgency. The captain immediately began maneuvering the vessel, changing speed and direction to create distance between the dangling tourists and the shark. One crew member grabbed a long pole with a blunt end, preparing to fend off the animal if it approached again. Another crew member worked the winch system, frantically reeling in Liam's compromised line, while simultaneously bringing Zoe and Harper closer to the boat. The shark made 2 more aggressive passes, snapping at shadows and the remaining ropes before apparently losing interest and disappearing into the darker water offshore. Liam was pulled aboard first, his face drained of color and his hands trembling uncontrollably. During the attack, his lower leg had scraped against the frayed rope, leaving deep abrasions across his calf that bled freely. Zoe and Harper landed on the deck moments later, both shaking and tearful. The crew immediately administered first aid to Liam's leg while the captain radioed the Coast Guard to report the incident. The boat returned to shore under police escort. Liam received treatment at the local medical center where doctors cleaned and bandaged his wounds. He would carry the scars permanently, thin white lines that served as a reminder of how quickly paradise could turn dangerous. Marine experts who later reviewed the incident noted that bull sharks in that region had become increasingly bold, possibly due to overfishing reducing their natural prey and forcing them to investigate unusual stimuli more aggressively. The parasailing company temporarily suspended operations while new safety protocols were developed, including avoiding areas with high baitfish concentration and maintaining a greater altitude during flights. The 3 friends returned to Brisbane 2 days later, their Valentine's Day adventure having transformed into something none of them would ever forget, for entirely different reasons than they had planned. Bremer Bay, located along the southern coast of Western Australia, had earned a peculiar reputation among fishermen and marine enthusiasts alike. The bay sat approximately 500 kilometers southeast of Perth, where the Southern Ocean's frigid waters crashed against Australia's continental shelf with relentless force. This meeting of deep ocean trenches and shallower coastal waters created a unique ecosystem that attracted an extraordinary array of marine life. During summer months, particularly between December and April, the bay became a feeding ground for orcas, great white sharks, and various whale species. When whales died, either from natural causes or predation, their massive carcasses would drift on currents, creating what marine biologists called whale falls. These floating buffets could sustain entire populations of scavengers for weeks, and the resulting feeding frenzies drew both researchers and opportunistic fishermen hoping to catch tuna and other pelagic species that gathered near the action. Garrett Millhouse, a 43-year-old carpenter from Perth, had fished these waters for 2 decades. He knew every reef, every current pattern, and every seasonal migration route. His 16-year-old son, Devlin, had accompanied him on fishing trips since the age of 8, learning to read weather patterns and handle boat equipment with the confidence of someone twice his age. The two shared a bond forged on countless early mornings watching the sun rise over the Southern Ocean, their lines cast into waters that had provided both livelihood and adventure. Garrett's wife had passed away from illness 4 years earlier, and these fishing expeditions had become sacred time for father and son, a way to maintain connection and continue family traditions. On January 18, 2024, Garrett and Devlin launched their 6-meter aluminum fishing boat from the Bremer Bay boat ramp just before dawn. The weather forecast predicted calm seas and clear skies, ideal conditions for reaching the deeper waters where they hoped to find tuna. Local reports had mentioned a deceased humpback whale spotted drifting approximately 15 kilometers offshore 2 days prior. Garrett knew that such a carcass would attract schools of tuna feeding on smaller fish drawn to the whale fall. Other fishermen might avoid the area due to the inevitable presence of sharks, but Garrett considered himself experienced enough to handle the risks. He had packed his usual gear: rods, tackle boxes, a cooler filled with ice, and several barrels of bait. What Garrett did not tell Devlin, and what investigators would later discover, was that he had also brought concentrated chum mixtures and additional bait barrels, specifically designed to attract predators. The practice of chumming near whale carcasses was controversial and technically illegal in protected waters, but enforcement was spotty and penalties were rarely severe. Some fishermen believed that strategic chumming would draw tuna closer to their boat by creating a feeding frenzy that brought all species to the surface. Others argued it was reckless stupidity that put everyone in danger. Garrett apparently fell into the former category. The boat reached the reported whale fall location around 7:30 that morning. The carcass, bloated and partially submerged, floated like a grotesque island, perhaps 200 meters from where Garrett anchored. The stench was overwhelming, a combination of decomposing flesh and ocean salt that made Devlin cover his nose with his shirt. Seabirds wheeled overhead in screaming clouds, diving periodically to tear strips of blubber from the exposed sections. Below the surface, shadows moved with purpose, large shadows. Garrett began setting up their fishing lines while simultaneously deploying his chum barrels. He poured mixtures of fish oil, blood, and ground bait directly into the water, creating slicks that drifted toward the whale carcass on the gentle current. Devlin questioned the wisdom of this approach, pointing out the obvious shark activity near the carcass. But Garrett dismissed his concerns with the confidence of someone who had gotten away with risky behavior before. Within 30 minutes, they had their first strikes. Tuna, drawn by the chum and the natural feeding opportunity, began hitting their lines with aggressive force. What Garrett and Devlin didn't know was that they were being observed. Craig Pemberton, a marine photographer from Esperance, had positioned his vessel approximately 1 kilometer away, documenting the whale fall through telephoto lenses. He had been tracking at least 4 large great white sharks circling the area. When Garrett's boat arrived and began deploying chum barrels, Craig watched with growing concern. He grabbed his radio to warn them, but didn't know their call sign. Through his lens, he watched the scene unfold with mounting horror. The sharks converging on the smaller vessel, their behavior increasingly agitated. He saw the boat suddenly lurch and list dangerously. Craig immediately radioed the Coast Guard, but by the time he pulled anchor and raced toward Garrett's position, it was too late. The boat was half submerged with no sign of the fishermen. Craig's photographs and testimony would later provide investigators with the only eyewitness account of the attack, though he would spend months haunted by his inability to prevent it. The Coast Guard received the distress call at 10:55. Emergency responders reached the scene within 40 minutes, finding a catastrophic situation. The boat's starboard side had been severely damaged, with deep gouges and bite marks consistent with a massive great white shark attack. Blood covered the deck, smeared across equipment, and pooled in the bottom of the hull. One life jacket floated approximately 50 meters away, torn and stained red. Fishing equipment lay scattered as if a violent struggle had taken place. Most disturbing was the absence of any human remains aboard the vessel. Craig Pemberton's vessel was already on scene when rescuers arrived, and he provided his account of witnessing the attack from a distance, along with the photographs he had managed to capture. Search and rescue operations continued throughout the afternoon and into the following day. Helicopters swept the coastline while boats combed the surrounding waters in expanding grid patterns. On January 19th, searchers recovered Garrett Milhouse's body, floating face down roughly 8 kilometers from where his boat had been found. The injuries were consistent with a great white shark attack, showing the characteristic massive trauma associated with a predator that could exert over 4,000 pounds of bite force. Devlin's body was never recovered, despite exhaustive searches that continued for 5 days. Investigators combed through the damaged boat, documenting every detail. They found the chum barrels still partially full and noted the proximity to the whale carcass. Craig Pemberton's eyewitness testimony and photographic evidence proved crucial to the investigation. Marine experts consulted on the case concluded that Garrett's chumming activities, combined with the natural feeding frenzy around the whale fall, had likely attracted multiple great white sharks to the immediate area. The boat's damage suggested at least one shark, possibly more than one, had struck the vessel with extraordinary force. Whether the attack was defensive, territorial, or simply the result of overstimulated predators in a feeding frenzy remained unclear. The incident sparked heated debate in Western Australian fishing communities. Conservationists pointed to the tragedy as evidence that chumming near whale falls should carry stricter penalties. Fishermen argued that accidents happened and that Garrett's individual choices should not result in blanket restrictions on legitimate fishing activities. Garrett's family, devastated by the loss of both father and son, declined to comment publicly. Bremer Bay continued to attract fishermen despite the tragedy. The waters remained rich with marine life, and the economic incentives proved too strong to resist. But among the local fishing community, Garrett and Devlin Millhouse became cautionary figures, their names spoken in hushed tones when discussions turned to the thin line between calculated risk and fatal recklessness. The ocean, as always, kept its secrets about what exactly happened during those final moments, leaving behind only fragments of evidence and the permanent absence of a father and son who had ventured too close to nature's most efficient killing machines. The Great Barrier Reef, stretching over 2,300 kilometers along Queensland's northeastern coast, represented one of Earth's most spectacular natural wonders. This vast underwater ecosystem, visible from space, contained thousands of individual reefs and hundreds of islands built from billions of coral polyps over millions of years. The waters surrounding the reef system teemed with marine biodiversity, from the smallest tropical fish to massive whale sharks and everything in between. The crystal-clear visibility and vibrant colors made it a natural choice for underwater photography, particularly for commercial fashion shoots that sought exotic backdrops. Several production companies had established thriving businesses creating underwater imagery for magazines, advertisements, and artistic portfolios. The combination of weightlessness, flowing fabrics, and colorful marine life created images that simply could not be replicated in traditional studios. Lena Hayes, a 27-year-old professional model from Sydney, had built her career on high-concept fashion photography. She had posed everywhere from Icelandic glaciers to African savannas, always seeking projects that pushed creative boundaries. When a prominent fashion magazine approached her about an underwater shoot at the Great Barrier Reef, she accepted immediately. The concept involved ethereal gowns photographed among coral formations, creating the impression of an underwater princess inhabiting a fantasy realm. Lena had completed scuba certification specifically for this type of work, logging over 30 dives in the 18 months before the shoot. She understood the risks inherent in underwater photography, but trusted the experienced dive team and photographer who would accompany her. The production team arrived at a reef site approximately 40 kilometers offshore on August 23, 2022. The location had been carefully selected for its pristine coral gardens and relatively calm waters. The photographer, a specialist in underwater fashion work, had scouted the area days earlier and identified specific formations that would provide dramatic backgrounds. The shoot required Lena to hover at an 8-meter depth, suspended in neutral buoyancy while wearing a custom-designed gown made from lightweight, flowing material that would billow and swirl in the gentle current. The dress, constructed from layers of silk and chiffon in shades of blue and silver, had been weighted at strategic points to prevent it from floating directly upward, while still allowing dramatic movement. The first 2 hours of shooting proceeded smoothly. Lena descended and ascended multiple times while the photographer adjusted angles, lighting equipment, and composition. Between takes, she rested on the boat deck, hydrating and reviewing images on the photographer's monitor. The underwater world seemed peaceful, with schools of tropical fish investigating the unusual visitors and sea turtles, gliding past with ancient indifference. By early afternoon, the team had captured dozens of stunning images and decided to attempt one final setup near a particularly striking coral formation. Lena descended for what everyone assumed would be the last dive of the day. She positioned herself at 8 meters, her gown spreading around her like a shimmering cloud. The photographer adjusted his housing, a large waterproof enclosure that protected his expensive equipment, while producing noticeable vibrations from internal motors and electronic components. He signaled for Lena to extend her arms and arch her back, creating elegant lines against the coral backdrop. She complied, holding the pose while he circled to capture different angles. Tiger sharks, named for the distinctive stripes that mark juveniles and faded with age, ranked among the ocean's most curious and opportunistic predators. Growing up to 5 meters in length, they possessed unique teeth designed to cut through turtle shells, fish, marine mammals, and anything else they encountered. Unlike great whites, which typically investigated potential prey with a test bite, tiger sharks often committed fully to attacking anything that triggered their interest. They inhabited tropical and subtropical waters worldwide, including the Great Barrier Reef, where they played crucial roles as apex predators maintaining ecosystem balance. The 12-foot tiger shark that approached the photo shoot had likely been attracted by the unusual vibrations from the camera housing, combined with the visual stimulus of Lena's flowing gown. The silvery reflective fabric moving in the current bore superficial resemblance to a large, distressed fish. The shark glided up from deeper water, its approach silent and nearly invisible until it was already within striking range. It moved with the eerie grace common to large predators, covering distance with minimal effort. The photographer noticed it first, his eyes widening behind his mask as the massive form materialized from the blue void. He immediately stopped shooting and began waving his arms, trying to appear larger and more threatening. The shark, however, had already committed. It surged forward and clamped its jaws onto the camera housing, its teeth scraping against the metal and plastic with horrifying force. The sudden attack yanked the photographer backward, and the attached strobes fired repeatedly, creating disorienting flashes that lit up the surrounding water. Lena, positioned just 3 meters away, felt the turbulence from the shark's powerful tail strokes. She spun in the current, her gown wrapping around her body as she tried to orient herself. The shark released the camera housing and turned its attention toward the other large moving object in its vicinity. It swept past Lena, its rough skin brushing against her exposed thigh and scraping away flesh in a painful abrasion. The impact pushed her sideways into the coral formation, where sharp edges tore through her gown and gouged her hip. The photographer, recovering from his initial shock, grabbed his dive stick and began jabbing at the shark's snout whenever it approached. Tiger sharks, while dangerous, would sometimes retreat when faced with active resistance rather than passive prey behavior. The photographer positioned himself between Lena and the predator, continuing to strike at its sensitive nose and gills. The shark circled twice more, its dark eyes fixed on them with unsettling focus, before apparently deciding these particular prey items were more trouble than they were worth. It descended back into deeper water and vanished. Lena and the photographer surfaced immediately, abandoning all the carefully planned safety stops that should have followed an 8-meter dive. The risk of decompression sickness seemed preferable to remaining in the water with an unpredictable tiger shark. The support team hauled them aboard within seconds, noting the blood streaming from Lena's leg and hip. The wounds, while painful and requiring immediate attention, had missed any major blood vessels. The photographer's equipment had suffered catastrophic damage, with deep bite marks puncturing the housing and destroying the expensive components inside. The boat raced back to the mainland, where Lena received treatment at a medical facility. Doctors cleaned and sutured the lacerations, administering antibiotics to prevent infection from bacteria, commonly found on shark skin and in ocean water. She would carry permanent scars from the encounter, raised white lines on her thigh and hip that served as unwelcome souvenirs from the shoot. The photographer's camera equipment was declared a total loss, though insurance would eventually cover the replacement costs. Marine biologists who reviewed the incident noted several contributing factors. The reflective flowing fabric combined with camera vibrations had created a sensory profile that mimicked distressed prey. Tiger sharks in that region had shown increased boldness in recent years, possibly due to declining fish populations forcing them to investigate unusual stimuli more aggressively. The attack itself was relatively brief because the shark quickly determined these were not its preferred prey items, demonstrating the species' opportunistic rather than deliberately aggressive nature. The fashion magazine published the underwater series several months later, though naturally excluding any mention of the attack in their editorial content. Lena Hayes continued her modeling career, but declined all subsequent underwater assignments, concluding that some creative concepts carried unacceptable risks regardless of the artistic results. The incident added another data point to the growing body of evidence that human activities in shark habitats, no matter how carefully planned, could never be entirely safe from predators that had ruled those waters for millions of years before humans ever thought to enter them. Port Lincoln, a coastal city on South Australia's Eyre Peninsula, had long served as a gateway to some of the most shark-populated waters in the Southern Hemisphere. The town sat approximately 700 kilometers west of Adelaide, where Spencer Gulf met the wild expanse of the Southern Ocean. Just offshore lay several small islands that hosted massive seal colonies, some containing thousands of Australian fur seals that bred, rested, and played in the surrounding waters. These colonies naturally attracted great white sharks, which had evolved over millions of years to hunt marine mammals with devastating efficiency. The region's shark diving industry thrived on this predator-prey relationship, offering tourists the chance to observe great whites from the safety of cages. The waters around Port Lincoln had earned recognition as one of the most reliable places on Earth to encounter these apex predators. Theo Murray, a 31-year-old adventure tourism operator from Adelaide, specialized in extreme water sports. He had discovered water-propelled jetpacks 2 years earlier and immediately recognized their commercial potential. The devices, which used high-pressure water jets to propel riders above the surface, created spectacular displays that attracted thrill-seekers willing to pay premium prices for the experience. Theo had logged over 300 jetpack flights in various locations along South Australia's coast, always seeking new and dramatic backdrops for his clients. When he conceived the idea of jetpacking near Port Lincoln seal colonies, he imagined creating promotional content that would showcase both the technology and the region's natural wildlife. On February 9, 2025, Theo arrived at a location approximately 3 kilometers offshore from one of the largest seal colonies. He had chartered a tour boat whose captain knew the area intimately, having operated shark diving tours for 15 years. The captain expressed immediate concerns about Theo's plan, warning that jetpack vibrations and water displacement near active hunting grounds could provoke unpredictable behavior from great whites. Theo acknowledged the risks, but insisted his experience and the jetpack's maneuverability would allow him to retreat quickly if any sharks showed interest. He suited up in his wetsuit, strapped into the jetpack harness, and received final safety checks from his support crew. The jetpack roared to life with a high-pitched whine, water shooting from twin nozzles and lifting Theo approximately 4 meters above the ocean surface. He maneuvered smoothly, performing gentle circles and figure eights while maintaining visual contact with the boat. The seal colony was clearly visible on nearby rocks, with dozens of animals barking and diving into the water. Below the surface, conditions were perfect for great white activity. The morning sun penetrated the clear water, and seals played in small groups, their movements creating exactly the kind of stimuli that triggered predatory responses. Theo descended lower, hovering perhaps 2 meters above the water while adjusting his stance. The jetpack's powerful jets created significant surface disturbance, with spray and waves radiating outward from his position. What he failed to notice was the massive shadow rising from the depths below him. The 18-foot great white had been patrolling the area, tracking seal movements and waiting for an opportunity. The jetpack's vibrations, combined with the splashing and Theo's proximity to hunting grounds, triggered investigative behavior. The shark erupted from below with shocking speed, its massive body clearing the water as it targeted the rear of the jetpack. The impact was tremendous, sending Theo spinning violently as the shark's jaws closed on the metal frame. Seawater blasted into his face, temporarily blinding him as he fought to maintain control. The shark fell back into the water but immediately surfaced again, its teeth leaving deep gouges in the jetpack's housing. Theo could hear the terrible sound of metal scraping against serrated teeth as the predator tried to tear away what it had seized. The boat crew began shouting instructions while maneuvering closer. Theo throttled the jetpack to maximum power, shooting upward and away from the attack zone. The shark made 2 more aggressive passes, its dorsal fin cutting through the water as it tracked the unusual disturbance. Each time Theo descended even slightly, the predator surged toward him, jaws open and white belly flashing in the sunlight. After nearly 3 minutes of sustained threat, Theo managed to gain enough altitude and distance to safely maneuver back to the boat. The crew hauled him aboard immediately, noting his pale face and shaking hands. The jetpack showed extensive damage, with puncture marks and bent metal where the shark had struck repeatedly. Theo remained physically unharmed, but later described the experience as the most terrifying minutes of his life. Marine biologists reviewing the incident noted that great whites often investigate unusual objects in their territory, particularly near seal colonies where they actively hunt. The jetpack's vibrations mimicked distressed prey, while Theo's proximity to the water made him accessible. The attack demonstrated how human technology, no matter how advanced, could not eliminate the inherent dangers of entering spaces where apex predators held evolutionary advantages, perfected over millions of years. Northwind Bay in southeastern Alaska represented one of North America's most pristine wilderness areas. The bay stretched inland for approximately 100 kilometers, flanked by towering mountains whose peaks remained snow-covered year-round. Massive tidewater glaciers calved icebergs directly into the frigid waters, creating a constantly changing seascape of floating ice in shades of blue and white. The area had been designated protected waters decades earlier, limiting commercial traffic and preserving the habitat for an extraordinary array of marine mammals, including humpback whales, harbor seals, sea lions, and orcas. During the summer months, the relatively calm conditions and extended daylight hours attracted private vessels whose wealthy owners sought to experience Alaska's legendary beauty from the comfort of luxury accommodations. In July 2020, a group of 6 friends from Seattle chartered a 40-foot luxury yacht for a week-long expedition through Northwind Bay. The group consisted of successful professionals in their 30s and 40s who had pooled resources to rent the vessel, complete with an experienced captain and first mate. Among them were Cassius Drummond, a software engineer, his wife Petra, an architect, along with their friends Marlo Chen, Indira Voss, Quillen Hayes, and Sienna Bridger. None of them had significant sailing experience, but the professional crew assured them that navigation and safety would be handled entirely by the yacht's staff, while they simply enjoyed the scenery. The yacht entered Northwind Bay on July 12th, motoring slowly past towering ice formations that dwarfed the vessel. The group spent hours on deck photographing glaciers, watching seals hauled out on ice floes, and marveling at the occasional whale spout in the distance. By late afternoon, they had anchored in a protected cove surrounded by mountains, planning to spend the evening enjoying dinner and the midnight twilight unique to Alaskan summers. The water remained calm, with only gentle swells rocking the yacht as the group relaxed on deck with drinks and conversation. Orcas, often called killer whales despite being the largest members of the dolphin family, inhabited waters worldwide but showed particular abundance in nutrient-rich areas like Alaska. These apex predators hunted in coordinated pods, using sophisticated communication and cooperative strategies to take down prey ranging from fish to seals to even juvenile whales. Adult males could exceed 8 meters in length and weigh over 6,000 kilograms, with distinctive black and white coloration and towering dorsal fins. While orcas rarely showed aggression toward humans, their immense size and power made any close encounter potentially dangerous, particularly when pods exhibited territorial or investigative behavior toward vessels in their range. The pod appeared without warning just after 7 in the evening. Dorsal fins broke the surface approximately 50 meters from the yacht, and initially the group responded with excitement rather than alarm. They rushed to the railings with their devices, eager to observe the magnificent creatures at close range. The captain, however, immediately recognized potential danger. He counted at least 8 individuals, including one massive male whose dorsal fin stood nearly 2 meters tall. The pod was moving directly toward the yacht with purpose rather than casual curiosity. The lead male reached the vessel first, diving beneath the hull before surfacing on the opposite side. Then, without warning, it rammed the hull with tremendous force. The impact sent shockwaves through the entire yacht, causing everyone on deck to stumble and grab for handholds. Chairs slid across the deck and crashed into railings. Petra screamed as she nearly lost her balance, caught by Cassius at the last moment. The captain immediately started the engines, attempting to maneuver away, but the pod had surrounded them. A second orca, nearly as large as the first, struck the stern with its massive head. Water surged across the deck, soaking everyone and carrying loose items overboard. The yacht listed dangerously to one side as a third orca breached partially out of the water and came down against the hull with a sound like thunder. Marlo and Quillen clung desperately to the railing, their feet slipping on the wet deck as the vessel rocked violently. The captain shouted instructions to the first mate, who was struggling to maintain position at the controls while the yacht pitched and rolled. The largest male circled back and began striking the hull with its tail in rhythmic, deliberate movements. Each impact sent vibrations through the yacht's structure and caused more water to cascade onto the deck. Equipment, cushions, and personal belongings tumbled into the sea. Indira grabbed a life jacket, convinced they were about to capsize. The first mate attempted to use the engines to create distance, but every maneuver seemed only to agitate the pod further. For nearly 8 terrifying minutes, the orcas continued their assault. They took turns ramming different sections of the hull, testing the yacht's stability with what seemed like calculated precision. Then, as suddenly as the attack began, the pod withdrew. The massive male surfaced one final time, perhaps 20 meters away, its eye visible above the waterline as it appeared to observe the damaged vessel, before diving and disappearing with the rest of the group. The yacht remained afloat but badly damaged. The captain inspected the hull and found multiple dents and cracks, though nothing that threatened immediate sinking. He radioed for assistance, and a Coast Guard vessel escorted them back to port the following morning. Marine biologists who later reviewed the incident suggested the pod may have been engaging in play behavior or investigating the yacht as a potential threat to their territory. The encounter served as a stark reminder that even in protected waters, wildlife remained wild and unpredictable, capable of overwhelming human technology with raw natural power.